She seemed fragile and helpless in her wheelchair, but behind that mask was cunning and cruelty. The stepmother humiliated the black boy, confident he wouldn't fight back. But the boy didn't give up. Day by day, he got closer to uncovering her secret, until he exposed the truth that could destroy her plans. Subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next, and let us know in the comments where are you watching this from. The sun was setting gently over the park as William strolled along the paved path with his young son, Liam, walking a few paces ahead. The boy, no more than 7, was full of life, his laughter carrying on the breeze, blending with the sounds of birds and the distant murmur of conversations. William, however, was quieter, contemplative, as his eyes followed his son's movements. Liam was the center of his world, his reason for pushing forward after the tragic death of his wife several years ago. Yet, despite the peace and happiness Liam brought him, there was a void in William's heart, a yearning he could never quite shake. He longed for companionship, for someone who could help him raise Liam and be a partner in life's trials. The park had always been a refuge for them, a place to escape the demands of William's busy life. A successful businessman, he'd built a comfortable life for his son, ensuring Liam lacked for nothing materially. But it wasn't material things that kept him up at night. It was the thought of Liam growing up without a mother. His wife, Emily, had been everything to him, and her sudden passing had left him broken in ways he hadn't thought possible. Liam had been too young to remember her well, but William carried those memories with him every day. As they continued their walk, they passed by the pond where ducks swam lazily across the water. William smiled softly as Liam pointed excitedly at the birds, his small face lighting up with pure joy. They stopped by the water's edge, Liam tossing bits of bread to the ducks as William stood silently behind him, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the rippling water. It was then that he noticed her. She sat in a wheelchair near the bench under a large oak tree, a solitary figure watching the water with an expression that mirrored the deep sadness he often felt. Her hair, a cascade of soft auburn waves, was tied back loosely, and her pale, delicate features were set in a faraway gaze. There was something fragile about her, as if the world had weighed her down, but hadn't yet broken her. She held a small bag of bread in her lap, occasionally tossing crumbs to the birds, but it was clear her mind was elsewhere. William couldn't tear his eyes away from her. It wasn't just her beauty, although she was undeniably beautiful, but the way she seemed so alone, as if she too was carrying a burden that no one else could see. Without realizing it, he felt an overwhelming urge to talk to her, to reach out to someone who might understand the pain he'd kept locked away for so long. "Liam, stay close, okay?" William said gently, nodding toward the ducks as the boy nodded eagerly. William hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the woman. As he approached, she glanced up, and their eyes met. Her expression softened slightly, but there was still a guardedness in her gaze, as if she wasn't used to people approaching her. "Hi," William began, his voice warm but uncertain. "I couldn't help but notice you over here. Do you mind if I join you?" For a moment, she looked at him, as if weighing whether to allow this stranger into her world. Finally, she offered a faint smile and nodded. "Of course," she said softly, her voice as delicate as her appearance. William sat on the bench beside her, stealing a quick glance at her wheelchair before turning his gaze back to the pond. There was a moment of silence between them, not awkward, but filled with unspoken thoughts. "I'm William," he said, breaking the quiet. "Scarlet," she replied, her smile growing a little wider. "You come here often?" he asked, unsure of how to begin. "Sometimes," Scarlet replied, looking down at her hands. It's a peaceful place. I like to watch the ducks. It helps me forget things for a while." William nodded, understanding more than she could know. "I know what you mean. I come here with my son, Liam." He gestured toward the boy, who was now busy chasing after a duck that had wandered a bit too far. "This place has become our little escape." Scarlet glanced over at Liam and smiled again, though this time it reached her eyes. "He seems like a sweet boy." "He is," William agreed, pride evident in his voice. "He's everything to me." Scarlet's gaze softened further, and for a moment they sat in comfortable silence, watching Liam. Then, out of nowhere, she began to speak again, her voice quiet and filled with emotion. "I had a different life before all of this," she said, motioning toward her wheelchair. I was in a car accident a few years ago. It changed everything. I lost more than just the ability to walk. I lost my independence, my dreams, my—" She trailed off, her voice faltering as her eyes filled with a sadness that tugged at William's heart. "I'm sorry," William said softly, unsure of what else to say. He could feel the weight of her words and knew all too well the kind of pain that came from losing someone or something you thought you'd always have. Scarlet shook her head. "It's okay. I've learned to live with it. You have to, don't you?" William didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked out at the water, thinking about Emily, about how much he missed her every day. "Yeah," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You do." They sat in silence for a while longer, sharing in a moment of quiet understanding. It was strange, William thought, how he could feel so connected to someone he had just met. Maybe it was the shared experience of loss, or maybe it was something else. Either way, he felt drawn to Scarlet in a way he hadn't felt in years. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the park, William found himself feeling something he hadn't expected: hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone who could help fill the void that had been left in his heart for so long. "Would you like to join us for dinner?" William asked, turning to Scarlet. The words came out before he had time to second-guess himself. "It's not much, just something simple at home, but I'd love for you to meet Liam properly." Scarlet hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'd like that," she said, her smile returning, though there was still a trace of that guardedness in her eyes. William smiled back, feeling lighter than he had in years. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe Scarlet was the person he and Liam had been waiting for. As they made their way back to the car, Liam bouncing excitedly ahead, William glanced at Scarlet, who rolled her wheelchair beside him. She seemed more at ease now, less fragile than when he'd first seen her. For the first time in a long time, William felt like the future might hold something good. But behind Scarlet's warm smile, there was something else, something that William, in his newfound hope, failed to notice. And as they drove toward his home, Liam sitting in the back seat, there was a flicker of uncertainty in the boy's eyes. He couldn't explain it, but something about Scarlet didn't sit right with him. The journey home felt like the beginning of a new chapter for William and Liam. But little did they know it was also the start of a dangerous game, one that would test the strength of their bond and the lengths they were willing to go to protect each other. A few days had passed since the encounter at the park, and true to his word, William invited Scarlet to stay at their home. The gesture was one of kindness, perhaps driven by something deeper, a desire to nurture the fragile hope he had found in meeting her. Scarlet seemed hesitant at first, but she eventually accepted, grateful for the invitation, or so it seemed. The first few days were idyllic. Scarlet appeared eager to integrate into their lives. She helped William with small chores around the house, despite her supposed physical limitations. Even more impressive to William was how quickly she seemed to bond with Liam. She would sit with him in the living room, helping him with puzzles, reading bedtime stories, and chatting with him about his favorite cartoons. At first, Liam felt optimistic. For a moment, it seemed as though she could become the mother figure he missed but had never truly known. William watched these interactions with a heart full of hope. Scarlet's gentleness reassured him that inviting her into their lives had been the right decision. She seemed patient, compassionate, and eager to be part of something bigger than herself, a family. Liam's laughter echoed through the house as they played games, and William often stood in the doorway, arms crossed with a contented smile, feeling that maybe, just maybe, his life was falling into place. But as soon as William stepped out of the house, the atmosphere changed. One day, he left for a meeting in the city, kissing Liam on the forehead before saying goodbye to Scarlet. "Take care of him for me," William said warmly, giving her hand a brief squeeze. Scarlet nodded with a soft smile, the image of kindness and care. Yet, the moment the front door closed behind him, Scarlet's expression shifted. The warmth faded from her eyes, replaced by a cold detachment. She wheeled herself into the living room where Liam sat on the floor, playing quietly with his toy cars. "Pick those up," she ordered, her tone sharp and impatient. Liam looked up, startled by the sudden change in her demeanor. "But I'm still playing. I said, pick them up, now." Scarlet's voice was low but filled with menace, her smile from earlier replaced by a steely glare. Confused and hurt, Liam slowly began gathering his toys, his small hands fumbling as he tried to process the sudden shift in her behavior. He opened his mouth to ask why she was being so mean, but the words caught in his throat. There was something unsettling about the way she stared at him, as if she saw him not as a child, but as an obstacle. When Liam didn't move fast enough, Scarlet wheeled closer to him, her chair inches away from his face. "Listen, kid," she hissed. "I know you think your daddy likes me, and he does. But let me make one thing clear. I'm in charge now. You stay out of my way, or I'll make sure you regret it." Liam's heart pounded in his chest, fear clutching at him. He had never met someone who could switch so suddenly from kindness to cruelty. He wanted to cry, to run to his father, but he knew William wasn't home. He was alone with Scarlet, and for the first time he felt helpless in his own house. The rest of the day dragged on in uncomfortable silence. Scarlet ignored Liam for the most part, leaving him to his own devices. When William finally returned that evening, the house seemed perfectly normal. Scarlet greeted him warmly at the door, wheeling toward him with a radiant smile. "How was your meeting?" she asked, her voice sweet and full of affection. "Long?" William replied with a tired smile, setting his briefcase down. "But it's good to be home. Everything okay here?" "Perfect," Scarlet said cheerfully. "Liam was such a good boy. Weren't you, sweetie?" She turned toward Liam, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly in warning. Liam forced a smile and nodded, but inside he felt trapped. Every time he tried to tell his father what had happened, Scarlet would shoot him a glance, a silent threat, a reminder to keep quiet. William, oblivious to the tension, ruffled Liam's hair affectionately and kissed Scarlet on the cheek, thanking her for taking care of things in his absence. Days turned into weeks, and Scarlet's influence over William deepened. She continued to charm him effortlessly, using every opportunity to reinforce the bond between them. They would stay up late, talking about the future, making plans, and dreaming of a life together. William confided in Scarlet in ways he hadn't with anyone since Emily's death, believing he had found someone who truly understood him. Meanwhile, Liam grew increasingly wary. Every interaction with Scarlet was laced with subtle hostility. She never raised her voice in William's presence, but the moment he left the room, she would drop her mask. She belittled Liam, made snide comments about how childish he was, and reminded him that once she and his father were married, things would be very different. "You think you're important now," she whispered to him one evening while William was upstairs. "But once I'm Mrs. Gray, you're just extra baggage. And trust me, I know how to get rid of things I don't need." Liam clenched his fists in frustration, but he knew there was nothing he could do. His father was too wrapped up in his feelings for Scarlet to see what was happening. Liam tried dropping hints, mentioning things Scarlet had said or done, but William always dismissed them. "She's just trying to help, buddy," William would say. "Give her a chance." Liam wanted to scream. He wanted to tell his father that Scarlet was not who she seemed, that she was manipulating him and planning something terrible. But every time he tried, Scarlet found a way to twist things, making Liam look like the jealous child who didn't want to share his father. One night, after William had fallen asleep, Scarlet cornered Liam in the hallway. "You need to stop trying to turn him against me," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper, "because if you don't, I'll make sure you're out of this house for good. And trust me, sweetheart, no one will care." Tears welled in Liam's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Instead, he glared at her, defiance burning in his small frame. "Do what you want," he whispered back. "I'll tell Dad the truth. He'll believe me." Scarlet laughed softly, a chilling sound in the quiet house. "Oh, darling," she murmured. "He'll never believe you. Not as long as I'm here." And with that, she wheeled herself away, leaving Liam standing alone in the dimly lit hallway, fear and frustration swirling in his chest. He knew then that he was on his own. If he wanted to protect his father, he would have to find a way to stop Scarlet himself. This was no longer just about having a new mother or adjusting to change. It was a battle, a fight for his home, his family, and his future. And Liam, small as he was, knew he couldn't afford to lose. Liam lay awake in his bed that night, staring up at the ceiling as shadows danced across the walls. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of wood as it settled under the weight of the night. His thoughts swirled in confusion and fear. Something was terribly wrong with Scarlet, but no one saw it but him. The way she changed when his father wasn't around, the venom in her words, the coldness in her eyes, was real. He had to find a way to convince his father, but how? The next morning, Scarlet was back to her sweet, nurturing self. She greeted William with a warm smile and a cup of freshly brewed coffee, her charm in full display. Liam watched from across the room, his small body tense as he tried to hide the resentment bubbling inside him. Scarlet's kindness was an act, and he knew it. Now, he just needed proof. Determined, Liam began paying closer attention to Scarlet's behavior. He started keeping a mental log of every odd thing she did, times when her con mask slipped, even for a second. At first, they were small things. She would grimace when William hugged him or roll her eyes whenever Liam asked his father for help with homework. These moments were fleeting, but they were there, cracks in her perfect facade that only Liam seemed to notice. Then, one day, something happened that sent alarm bells ringing in Liam's mind. He was playing quietly in the living room, pretending to be focused on his toys while Scarlet was in the adjacent kitchen. She thought she was alone, and Liam took the opportunity to sneak a glance in her direction. He watched, holding his breath as she wheeled herself to the kitchen counter, glanced around to ensure no one was watching, and then, slowly, deliberately, stood up from the wheelchair. Liam's eyes widened in shock. Scarlet stood upright, stretching her arms above her head as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She balanced perfectly on both feet, her movements fluid and steady. The wheelchair that she had supposedly relied on was nothing more than a prop. He wanted to scream, to run upstairs and tell his father right that second, but instinct told him to stay still. If she saw him, she would know he was watching, and Liam wasn't ready for that confrontation just yet. Instead, he crouched lower behind the couch, heart pounding in his chest, and waited until Scarlet sat back down in the wheelchair, her expression calm and composed as if nothing had happened. The weight of what he had just witnessed settled heavily in his mind. Scarlet wasn't injured, at least not in the way she had claimed. She was lying, manipulating his father with an elaborate story to gain sympathy. But why? And more importantly, how could Liam make his father see the truth? That evening, when William came home from work, Liam decided to confront him. He needed his father to understand, to believe him. "Dad," Liam began hesitantly as they sat together at the dinner table. Scarlet was in the other room, giving them a rare moment alone. "There's something I need to tell you." William glanced up from his plate, his expression patient but tired. "What's on your mind, buddy?" Liam swallowed hard. "It's about Scarlet. I saw her standing up today." William chuckled softly, brushing it off without a second thought. "Liam, that's not possible. She's been through so much." "No, Dad," Liam interrupted, frustration spilling into his voice. "I saw her. She got up from the wheelchair like she didn't need it at all." William's smile faded, and his brow furrowed as he leaned closer to his son. "Liam, listen to me. I know you've had a hard time adjusting to Scarlet being here, but she's not lying. She is!" Liam cried, desperate to make his father understand. "I swear, Dad, I'm not making this up." But William shook his head, his expression softening with sympathy. "I think you're just feeling a little jealous, buddy. It's okay. I understand. But Scarlet is a good person. She cares about both of us. You'll see." Liam slumped in his chair, defeated. His father didn't believe him. Worse, he thought Liam's warnings were nothing more than childish jealousy. That night, Liam lay awake once more, staring at the ceiling, frustration and fear gnawing at him. He realized something that chilled him to the core. He was on his own. No one would believe him, not even his own father. If he wanted to protect his family, he had to do it himself. The next few days, Liam dedicated himself to learning everything he could about Scarlet. He followed her movements around the house, pretending to play while watching her closely. He noticed the way she would glance at her phone when she thought no one was looking, her fingers flying across the screen in hushed conversations. He began sneaking peeks at her phone whenever he had the chance, hoping to find clues, anything to confirm his suspicions. It was a dangerous game. Scarlet was clever, always watching, always aware. There were moments when their eyes would meet across the room and Liam felt the weight of her unspoken threat. She knew he was suspicious, and she made it clear that she wasn't afraid of him. One afternoon, while William was at work, Liam managed to sneak into Scarlet's room. His heart pounded as he crept toward her nightstand, where she always left her phone. He knew he only had a few minutes before she returned from her daily rest in the backyard. His small hands shook as he unlocked the phone. He had seen the passcode by accident a few days ago and scrolled through her messages. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Conversations with unknown contacts discussing William's finances, making plans to gain control of his accounts, and even thinly veiled threats about getting rid of the boy once the wedding was over. Liam's breath caught in his throat as he realized the full extent of Scarlet's intentions. She wasn't just a liar, she was dangerous. She was using his father, planning to take everything they had, and worse, she intended to push Liam out of the picture entirely. Just as Liam was about to take screenshots of the messages, he heard the soft creak of the back door opening. Panic surged through him and he quickly locked the phone, placing it back on the nightstand just as Scarlet's shadow loomed in the doorway. "What are you doing in here?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm but with an edge of menace. Liam forced a nervous smile. "I was just looking for my book." Scarlet's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Liam thought she might call him out. But then she gave him that same saccharine smile she always wore around his father. "Careful where you snoop, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice low and threatening. "You wouldn't want to find something you shouldn't." Liam slipped past her, his heart pounding, knowing he had narrowly escaped being caught. But now he had the truth, and he was more determined than ever to stop Scarlet before it was too late. He just had to figure out how. The weight of what Liam had discovered sat heavily on his young shoulders. Scarlet wasn't just someone pretending to need help. She was a con artist, working with others to steal his father's fortune and, worse, planning to get rid of him. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed proof, real proof, and he had to be careful. Scarlet was growing suspicious of him, and one wrong step could mean losing any chance to save his family. The days that followed were filled with tension. Scarlet watched him closely, her pleasant smile intact whenever William was around, but her eyes always flicked to Liam with a cold, calculating glare when his father wasn't looking. Liam knew that if he didn't act soon, Scarlet would win. She would marry his father, gain control of everything, and make good on her threat to get rid of him. Liam decided to start recording Scarlet's conversations. He found his father's old tape recorder tucked away in a drawer, an outdated device but one that still worked. Each time Scarlet was on the phone, Liam would sneak close enough to capture bits of her conversations. The risk was enormous, but he knew it was the only way to get the proof he needed. One afternoon, while William was out running errands, Liam crept down the hallway, clutching the recorder tightly in his hand. Scarlet's voice drifted from the kitchen, her tone hushed and businesslike. Liam crouched behind the wall, holding his breath as he pressed the record button. "He's completely blind to it," Scarlet was saying, a smug edge in her voice. "The wedding is in a few weeks, and once it's done, we'll start moving the money. No, don't worry about the kid. He's not a problem. I'll handle him." Liam's heart raced as he listened, his hands trembling. Scarlet's words were clear. She had every intention of taking everything from his father. And worse, she was planning something for him, something that made his skin crawl. Just as the conversation continued, Scarlet's voice dropped to a low, menacing whisper. "After the wedding, he'll be out of the house for good. I've already made arrangements. He'll be gone before William even realizes." Liam's chest tightened. She wasn't just talking about sending him away. This was something worse. He couldn't let it happen. He had to stop her no matter what. Suddenly, Scarlet's voice cut off, and there was a brief silence. Liam held his breath, terrified she had caught him listening. Then he heard the click of her phone as she ended the call. Footsteps echoed across the kitchen floor, growing closer. Liam panicked. He scrambled to his feet and darted toward his room, clutching the recorder tightly to his chest. He made it to the door just as Scarlet's shadow appeared at the end of the hall. "What are you doing, Liam?" she asked, her voice light but tinged with suspicion. Liam turned slowly, forcing himself to appear calm. "Nothing," he said, his heart pounding. "Just going to my room." Scarlet's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Liam thought she might press him further. But then she gave him that same fake smile she always wore around his father. "Good boy," she said softly. "It's important to stay out of trouble." Liam nodded and slipped into his room, closing the door behind him. His hands were shaking as he hid the recorder beneath his pillow. He had the evidence now, proof of Scarlet's plans. But it wasn't enough. He needed to do more. He needed to make sure his father heard it before Scarlet could twist things in her favor. The next day, Liam carefully retrieved the recorder from its hiding place and listened to the tape. His hands tightened into fists as Scarlet's voice played back, each word like a dagger to his heart. He knew his father wouldn't want to believe it. Scarlet had him completely fooled, but Liam had no choice. He had to tell him, and he had to do it soon. Later that evening, Liam saw his opportunity. His father was in the study reviewing some papers, and Scarlet was upstairs pretending to rest. Liam crept quietly into the room, the recorder hidden behind his back. "Dad," Liam began, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. William looked up, his eyes tired but kind. "What's up, buddy?" "I need to show you something," Liam said, stepping closer. "It's really important." William set his papers aside and gave Liam his full attention. "Okay, what is it?" Liam took a deep breath and held out the recorder. "You need to hear this. It's about Scarlet." William's expression shifted, concern flickering in his eyes. He reached for the recorder and pressed play. Scarlet's voice filled the room, cold and calculating. Liam watched his father's face as the recording played, his heart pounding in his chest. At first, William's expression was unreadable, but as the conversation continued, a deep frown etched itself across his features. His hands tightened around the recorder and his jaw clenched. When the tape ended, William sat in silence, his gaze fixed on the recorder as if trying to process what he had just heard. Liam held his breath, praying his father would finally see the truth. After a long moment, William looked up, his eyes clouded with disbelief. "Liam, where did you get this?" "I recorded it," Liam whispered. "She was talking on the phone. She's planning to take everything, Dad, and she said she's going to get rid of me." William's hands trembled slightly as he placed the recorder on the desk. His mind raced, torn between the undeniable evidence and the emotional connection he had built with Scarlet. He didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to think that the woman he thought could be his new partner was nothing more than a con artist. Just as William opened his mouth to respond, the door creaked open behind them. Both father and son turned to see Scarlet standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I was wondering where you two had disappeared to," she said, her voice smooth and sweet. "What's going on in here?" Liam's heart sank. Scarlet's eyes flicked to the recorder on the desk, and her smile faltered ever so slightly. She knew. She knew what they had been listening to. William rose from his chair, his eyes locked on Scarlet. "We need to talk," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of betrayal. Scarlet's smile tightened, but she nodded, stepping into the room. "Of course, darling. Whatever you need." Liam watched, his heart racing as his father and Scarlet faced each other. The tension in the room was palpable, and Liam knew that whatever happened next would determine the fate of their family. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur, tension building within the house like a coiled spring. William hadn't spoken much since hearing the recording, his face constantly clouded with doubt. Liam could see his father was torn between his feelings for Scarlet and the mounting evidence against her. Yet, despite everything, preparations for the wedding continued, as if on autopilot. Scarlet, for her part, seemed unfazed. If anything, she appeared even more confident, her smile unshakable as she floated through the house, making plans for the big day. She greeted the arriving guests with grace and warmth, playing the perfect role of the soon-to-be bride. But every time her eyes fell on Liam, they flashed with warning, a silent threat that kept him on edge. Liam, desperate and afraid, knew that time was running out. He had given his father the proof, but William had yet to confront Scarlet. Every passing moment only brought them closer to the wedding, and with it, the realization that Scarlet could succeed in her plan. Liam felt helpless, like he was watching his world fall apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The night before the wedding, William sat alone in his study, staring at the invitations scattered across his desk. Liam stood in the doorway, watching his father with a mixture of frustration and fear. Why wasn't he doing anything? Why wasn't he stopping this? "Dad?" Liam's voice was small, hesitant. William looked up, his eyes tired and conflicted. "What is it, son?" "Why are you still going through with this?" Liam asked, stepping into the room. "You heard what she said. She's going to take everything. She's going to get rid of me." William sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Liam," he said softly. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Liam felt a surge of frustration. "Dad, you have to believe me. Scarlet is lying to you. She's dangerous." William stood up from his chair, crossing the room to kneel in front of his son. "Liam, I know this is hard for you. I know you don't want to accept it, but Scarlet isn't the person you think she is. She's been kind to me. She's been kind to you." "No, she hasn't." Liam's voice rose, his hands curling into fists. "She's only pretending, Dad. She's been lying to you from the start." William looked into his son's eyes, the weight of his emotions pulling at him from every angle. He wanted to believe Liam. He truly did, but Scarlet had wrapped herself so tightly around his heart that it was hard to separate the truth from the lies. He had been alone for so long, and Scarlet had brought him something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. "I'll talk to her," William finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After the wedding, I'll talk to her. I'll figure this out." Liam stared at him, his heart sinking. "After the wedding? But Dad?" William shook his head. "I need time, Liam. Just give me until after the wedding. Then we'll deal with it." Liam's stomach twisted with dread. He knew that after the wedding it would be too late. Scarlet would have everything: control of the finances, power over his father, and a way to get rid of him without a trace. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. His mind raced with panic, going over every possible way to stop Scarlet before the ceremony. The wedding was set to take place at their home, a small and intimate gathering in the backyard. It was meant to be a celebration of love, but to Liam, it felt like the final step in a carefully orchestrated trap. The morning of the wedding arrived with an unsettling stillness. Guests began to trickle into the house, their cheerful chatter a stark contrast to the tension that gnawed at Liam's insides. Scarlet was in her room, preparing for the ceremony, while William moved about the house, greeting guests with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Liam watched it all unfold from a corner of the living room, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he had to act now before it was too late. His father wasn't going to stop the wedding. He had to do it himself. As the ceremony drew closer, Liam slipped out of the house and made his way to Scarlet's room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear her talking on the phone inside. He crept closer, pressing his ear to the crack in the door. "Everything's in place," Scarlet was saying, her voice low and confident. "Once the ceremony's over, I'll take care of the rest. He won't know what hit him." Liam's blood ran cold. She was talking about his father, about taking everything from him, and she was so close to succeeding. He couldn't wait any longer. With a deep breath, Liam pushed open the door and stepped into the room. Scarlet, dressed in her wedding gown, turned to face him, her expression icy. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm not going to let you do this," Liam said, his voice shaking but determined. "You're not going to marry my dad. You're not going to take everything from him." Scarlet's eyes narrowed. "And what exactly are you going to do to stop me, little boy?" Liam swallowed hard, his hands trembling at his sides. "I'm going to tell everyone the truth. I'm going to show them what kind of person you really are." Scarlet laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "You really think anyone will believe you? You're just a child, Liam. No one's going to listen to you." "They will," Liam said, his voice growing stronger, "because I have proof." Scarlet's smile faltered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" Liam stepped closer, meeting her gaze with steely determination. "I recorded everything. Your phone calls, your conversations, everything. And I'm going to play it for everyone." Scarlet's face twisted in rage, and for a moment Liam thought she might attack him. But then she composed herself, her smile returning, though it was strained. "You're bluffing," she said, her voice cold. "You don't have anything." "I'm not bluffing," Liam shot back, "and you're not going to get away with this." Just then, the door opened, and William stepped into the room. He looked between Scarlet and Liam, confusion etched across his face. "What's going on in here?" he asked, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the tension. Liam turned to his father, his heart pounding. "Dad, I need you to listen to me. Scarlet's lying to you. She's been lying to you this whole time." Scarlet's face paled, and she quickly moved toward William, her voice soothing. "Darling, don't listen to him. He's just upset. He doesn't understand." But William held up a hand, silencing her. "Liam, what are you talking about?" Liam took a deep breath and met his father's eyes. "I have proof, Dad. I have recordings of Scarlet talking about her plans to take everything from you. She's been lying to us, and I can prove it." William's face tightened, his gaze shifting to Scarlet, who looked as though she was struggling to maintain her composure. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You can't seriously believe him, William." But William wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at Liam, the doubt that had clouded his mind for so long finally starting to clear. "Show me the proof," he said quietly. Scarlet's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "William, no, don't listen to him. He's—" But William cut her off. "I said, show me the proof, Liam." Liam nodded and pulled the recorder from his pocket, his hand shaking as he handed it to his father. William pressed play, and Scarlet's voice filled the room, cold, calculating, and filled with malice. William listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each passing second. When the tape finally ended, he looked up at Scarlet, his face a mask of anger and betrayal. "How could you?" he whispered, his voice filled with pain. Scarlet took a step toward him, her hands outstretched. "William, I can explain." But William shook his head, stepping back. Don't say another word." Scarlet's face twisted in desperation, but before she could speak again, the door opened and several guests who had overheard the confrontation began to filter into the room. Their faces were filled with confusion and shock, having caught the tail end of the recording. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, looking between Scarlet and William. William's gaze hardened, and he turned to the gathered crowd. "The wedding's off," he said firmly. "Scarlet's been lying to us. She's a con artist." Gasps of shock filled the room as Scarlet's mask finally crumbled. Her face twisted in fury, and in a final moment of desperation, she did the one thing that sealed her fate. She stood up from her wheelchair. The room fell silent, eyes widening in disbelief as Scarlet revealed that she had been able to walk all along. Her anger boiled over, and she turned on Liam, pointing a finger at him in accusation. The shock of seeing Scarlet stand sent a ripple of disbelief through the crowd gathered at the door. Guests gasped, their eyes wide with confusion, and whispers filled the room as they struggled to comprehend what they had just witnessed. Scarlet, the woman who had been in a wheelchair for the entirety of her relationship with William, was now standing tall, her face contorted in anger and humiliation. Liam stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known Scarlet was faking her disability, but to see her exposed in front of everyone in such a dramatic fashion left him momentarily stunned. His gaze flicked toward his father, hoping against hope that William now saw the truth for what it was. William, standing at the center of the room, looked as if the ground had been pulled out from beneath him. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight, and his eyes locked onto Scarlet's in disbelief. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had fallen for, had been deceiving him in the most elaborate and cruel way possible. Scarlet, realizing the enormity of her mistake, quickly shifted her expression from one of fury to one of desperation. Her voice wavered as she tried to regain control of the situation. "William, please, I can explain," she stammered, her hands trembling as she reached out toward him. "It's not what it looks like. I didn't mean for things to go this far. I was afraid that you wouldn't love me if you knew the truth." William's expression remained stony, his fists clenched at his sides. He shook his head slowly, disbelief still washing over him. "You lied to me, Scarlet, about everything." Scarlet took a step closer to him, her eyes wide with panic. "No, not everything. William, please, I love you. I didn't want to hurt you. I was just trying to protect us. I needed your help, and I didn't know how else to—" "Stop," William interrupted, his voice hard and cold. "Just stop." Scarlet froze, her breath catching in her throat as William's words cut through the air like a knife. His face, once filled with warmth and affection for her, was now set in stone, and the disappointment in his eyes was unmistakable. "You think this is love?" William continued, his voice rising. "Lying to me? Manipulating me, pretending to be someone you're not? You were never interested in us. All you wanted was my money, wasn't it?" Scarlet's lips trembled as she tried to form a response, but the truth had already been laid bare, and there was no way to salvage her web of lies. She glanced nervously at the guests who had gathered behind them, their faces a mixture of shock and judgment. I didn't mean for it to be like this," Scarlet whispered, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for a way out. "William, you have to understand." "No," William said, his voice firm. I don't have to understand anything. You lied to me, Scarlet. You've been lying to me since the day we met, and I was too blind to see it." Scarlet's desperation deepened, and her mask of sweet innocence began to crack under the weight of the truth. She turned her gaze toward Liam, her eyes narrowing in anger. "You," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at him, "this is all your fault. You've been trying to turn your father against me from the beginning." Liam stood his ground, refusing to back down. He could feel his father's eyes on him, and for the first time, he felt like William truly saw him, saw what he had been trying to protect them from. "I wasn't turning him against you," Liam said, his voice steady despite the fear tightening in his chest. "I was trying to stop you from hurting him, from hurting us." Scarlet sneered, her composure unraveling further with every second. "You little brat, you ruined everything. I should have gotten rid of you the moment I had the chance." William stepped forward then, placing himself between Scarlet and Liam, his protective instincts kicking in. His eyes blazed with anger as he spoke, his voice low and threatening. "Don't you dare talk to my son like that." Scarlet's eyes flickered with fear, but she quickly masked it with defiance. "Oh, please, William. You think you're so high and mighty? You think you can just walk away from this? I've put months into this relationship. I was going to be your wife. Do you really think you can just throw me out now?" "Watch me," William said coldly. Scarlet's face twisted in rage, and for a moment it seemed as if she might lash out physically. But then, just as quickly as her anger had flared, it dissipated, replaced by a look of resignation. She straightened her posture, glaring at William with a mixture of hatred and contempt. "Fine," she spat. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? You think you're better than me because I lied? Well, guess what, William? You're just as much of a fool as I thought you were. And your precious son here, he's the reason you'll end up alone. Just wait. You'll see." Scarlet's words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, but William didn't flinch. He simply stood there, his face hard, his eyes locked on hers. "It's over, Scarlet," William said quietly. "You're done here." Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the tension in the room. Several uniformed police officers appeared at the doorway, led by a guest who had called them after overhearing the confrontation. One of the officers stepped forward, his expression serious as he addressed Scarlet. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." Scarlet's eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment she looked as though she might try to run. But there was nowhere to go. The walls had closed in on her, and she knew it. "Wait, no, you can't do this," she cried, backing away from the officers. "I didn't do anything wrong. You can't arrest me." The officer shook his head, his voice firm. "We have enough evidence to take you in for fraud and conspiracy, ma'am. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Scarlet's face twisted in desperation, but it was too late. The officers moved in, and within moments she was handcuffed and led out of the room, her pleas for mercy falling on deaf ears. As she was escorted out of the house, the gathered guests remained silent, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of shock and disbelief. William stood motionless for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the doorway where Scarlet had disappeared. Liam stood beside his father, his small hand reaching up to take his father's. William looked down at him, his expression softening as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He knelt down in front of Liam, placing a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Liam," William whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have listened to you. I should have believed you." Liam shook his head, his heart swelling with relief and love for his father. "It's okay, Dad," he said softly. "I just didn't want her to hurt you." William pulled Liam into a tight hug, holding him close as the weight of the moment pressed down on them both. The danger had passed, but the scars left behind by Scarlet's deception would take time to heal. As the remaining guests quietly began to leave, the sun started to set outside the window, casting a warm glow over the now empty house. William and Liam stood side by side, gazing out at the horizon, knowing that, despite everything, they still had each other. It wasn't the ending William had hoped for, but as he looked at his son, he realized it was the one they needed. The house was quiet after the guests left, and the weight of Scarlet's betrayal still lingered in the air. William sat with Liam on the front porch, the setting sun casting long shadows across the lawn. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The ordeal had taken a toll on them both, and the silence felt like a fragile thread holding everything together. William stared out at the horizon, his heart heavy with regret. He had been so blind, so desperate for love that he had failed to see the truth right in front of him. Scarlet's lies had not only threatened his life, but had also endangered the person who mattered most to him, his son. Liam sat quietly beside his father, his legs swinging back and forth as he clutched a glass of lemonade in his small hands. Though he had won, the victory felt bittersweet. The fear and tension that had consumed him for weeks were finally gone, but it left behind a deep exhaustion in its wake. William sighed heavily, rubbing a hand over his face before turning toward Liam. "I'm sorry, buddy," he said softly. "I should have listened to you from the beginning. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong." Liam looked up at his father, his eyes filled with understanding beyond his years. "It's okay, Dad," he whispered. "You were just trying to be happy." The words hit William harder than he expected, and he pulled Liam into a gentle hug, holding him close. "I'll never let anything like that happen again," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "From now on, it's just us. I'll always listen to you, no matter what." They sat like that for a while, the warmth of the sunset wrapping around them as if offering some small measure of comfort. The nightmare was over, but it would take time to heal the wounds Scarlet had left behind. "Do you think we'll be okay?" Liam asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. William smiled, brushing his son's hair back from his forehead. "Yeah," he said softly. "We'll be okay. We've got each other, and that's all that matters." They stayed on the porch until the stars began to appear in the night sky. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't seem so uncertain. It wasn't the life William had imagined, but it was theirs, and that made it enough. In the days that followed, William and Liam settled back into their routine. The house felt lighter without Scarlet's presence, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. William contacted the police to follow through on the charges against Scarlet, ensuring she and her accomplices would face justice. It was a long and exhausting process, but with each step, William felt more in control, more certain that he and Liam were on the right path. One afternoon, a few weeks after the wedding fiasco, William and Liam found themselves back at the park, the same place where they had first met Scarlet. The memory of that encounter lingered, but it no longer held the same weight. They were free now, free to create new memories, ones untouched by lies and deceit. Liam chased ducks along the edge of the pond, his laughter echoing through the trees. William watched him with a soft smile, his heart swelling with pride and love for the boy who had saved them both. As Liam ran back toward him, out of breath but grinning from ear to ear, William crouched down and ruffled his son's hair. "What do you say we grab some ice cream?" he asked, his voice light and playful. Liam's face lit up with excitement. "Can we get double scoops?" he asked eagerly. "Double scoops, extra sprinkles," William promised with a chuckle. They walked side by side toward the ice cream stand, their footsteps light, their hearts finally at peace. For the first time in a long while, William felt hopeful. Life wouldn't always be easy, but as long as they had each other, he knew they could face whatever challenges came their way. And maybe, just maybe, one day they would find someone who truly loved them for who they were, someone who would become a real part of their family, but for now they had everything they needed. As the sun set over the park, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, William glanced down at Liam and gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Liam squeezed back, his small hand fitting perfectly into his father's. They didn't need anything else. Not today, not tomorrow. They had each other, and that was enough. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on what's coming next. Check out our other videos. There are even more powerful stories waiting for you. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Where are you watching this from?